Some losses don't break you all at once. They do it slowly, the way rust eats through iron. Quietly, patiently, until one morning you reach for something solid and your hand goes right through it. That's what losing Michael did to me. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I want you to picture something. Close your eyes. Actually, don't. Keep them open. You'll need to see this. Imagine you wake up every single morning for 4 years, and the first thought that hits you before your feet even touch the floor is, "Where is my son?" Not as a question anymore. More like a reflex. Like breathing. Like the way your heart beats without asking permission. That was my life. My name is Garrett Flynn. I'm 51 years old. I drive a truck that should have been retired 3 winters ago, and I live in a 2-bedroom cabin on the edge of Millhaven, Colorado, which is the kind of town people pass through on their way to somewhere better. I used to be an accountant. I used to have a wife named Annie, who smelled like vanilla and laughed too loud at her own jokes. I used to have a son named Michael, who was 17, brilliant, and absolutely terrible at skiing. That last part matters. Remember it. It was a school trip, Cedar Peak Ski Resort, 42 kids, 4 chaperones, 1 mountain, and somewhere between the second run of the day and lunch, Michael Flynn ceased to exist. No body, no note, no goodbye. Just a missing ski pole found 300 yards off the marked trail, a boot print in the snow that stopped like God himself had reached down and lifted my son off the earth, and a resort staff that went from sympathetic to suspicious to silent in the span of about 72 hours. I remember Cole Branson, the ski instructor assigned to Michael's group, standing in the resort office with his arms crossed, telling the sheriff. I turned around for maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes he was right there. 2 minutes. My son. Gone. The sheriff called it a tragic accident. Said Michael likely fell into one of the unmarked ravines on the north face. Said the terrain was unforgiving. Said they'd searched as long as conditions allowed. I said, search longer. They didn't. So I searched myself. Spent the first year doing nothing but. Hired 2 private investigators. Fired both of them when I realized I was paying one to drink and the other to agree with me. Spent my savings. Then Annie's life insurance. Then borrowed from Spencer Locke next door, who never once asked when I'd pay him back, which is the definition of a real friend if I've ever seen one. Spencer used to bring me food I didn't ask for and sit on my porch without saying anything. One evening I finally looked over at him and said, "You know you don't have to keep doing this." And he just shrugged and said, "I know." That man saved my life at least 4 times without either of us ever acknowledging it. But even Spencer couldn't save me from what the 4th year had turned me into. By then, the leads had dried up. The Facebook group I'd started, Find Michael Flynn, had gone quiet. The journalists who'd briefly found my story interesting had moved on to fresher grief. And I was sitting in that cabin surrounded by 4 years of printed emails, pinned maps, highlighter-marked documents, and cold coffee, looking like a man who'd confused obsession with hope. I wasn't well. I knew I wasn't well. I just didn't particularly care. It was a Tuesday in February when Jackson showed up. I remember because I was arguing with my truck. The engine had stalled, again, in my own driveway, and I was standing in 6 inches of fresh snow in my house slippers, leaning under the hood like I had any idea what I was looking at, saying things to that engine that I will not repeat in polite company. That's when I heard the tires. A car pulled up the gravel path behind me. Slow, deliberate. The kind of slow that means whoever's driving has been here before in their mind long before they got here in person. I didn't turn around immediately, mostly because I assumed it was Spencer with another casserole I hadn't requested. So I just called out, "If that's food, leave it on the porch. If it's bad news, drive back the way you came." Footsteps in the snow, and a voice I hadn't heard in 11 years said, "Still talking to inanimate objects, I see." I turned around so fast I hit my head on the truck hood. Jackson, my brother Jackson, who I hadn't spoken to since Annie's funeral, where we'd said things to each other that don't unsay themselves easily, was standing in my driveway in a charcoal wool coat, hands in his pockets beside a black Mercedes that had absolutely no business being on a gravel road in Millhaven, Colorado. He looked older, of course he did, but he also looked like money, which he'd always been better at than me, and he looked like someone who had rehearsed this moment several times and was still not entirely sure it was going to go well. Smart man. I pulled my head out from under the hood, straightened up, and stared at him for what felt like a full minute. The snow was falling lightly between us, like the universe thought this needed atmosphere. Finally I said, "You've got some nerve." And he said, "I know." 11 years, Jackson. And he said, "I know. You didn't even call." And this is the part that stopped every angry thing I'd been preparing to say. He said, "Garrett, get in the car. I know where Michael is." The world didn't stop. That's the thing nobody tells you. When the moment you've spent 4 years praying for finally arrives, the world doesn't stop spinning. A bird still called from somewhere in the tree line. My truck engine ticked as it cooled. Snow kept falling. But I stopped. Every molecule in my body just stopped. I looked at my brother's face. Jackson has always been many things. Slippery, ambitious, occasionally infuriating. But he has never, not once in his life, been a liar. That was always my one grudging respect for him. The man did not lie. He wasn't lying now. I could see it in the way he was standing. Not like someone delivering hope. Like someone delivering a weight. Like whatever he knew was something he'd been carrying for a while, and it had not been comfortable. I took a breath, then another. Then I looked down at my house slippers, looked back up at him. "Give me 2 minutes to put on actual shoes." He almost smiled. Almost. "Take 3, he said. "We've got a long drive." I grabbed my boots, my jacket, and the one thing I always kept on the kitchen counter, a photograph of Michael. 17 years old, grinning like he owned the world, standing at the base of Cedar Peak with his ski poles crossed like an X, wearing that ridiculous yellow helmet Annie had bought him, because she said it would make him easy to spot on the slopes. Easy to spot. I tucked it into my breast pocket, right over my heart, and walked out to my brother's Mercedes. Whatever Jackson knew, wherever this road was going, I had been waiting 4 years for it. I was ready, or so I thought. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. There's a particular kind of silence that exists between two brothers who haven't spoken in 11 years. It's not peaceful. It's not comfortable. It's the kind of silence that has furniture in it. Old arguments, old wounds, things said at a graveside that neither man has ever figured out how to take back. It fills a car the way smoke fills a room. Slowly, completely, until breathing becomes a conscious effort. Jackson drove. I sat. For the first 20 minutes, neither of us said a single word. I watched the Colorado landscape roll past the window, bare aspens, gray sky, snow-packed roads, and I thought about all the versions of this conversation I'd imagined over the years, all the things I'd say to Jackson if I ever saw him again, the accusations, the questions, the 11 years of silence I'd planned to hand back to him like a bill he owed me. None of those conversations had started with, "I know where Michael is." So I threw out the script. Finally, without looking at him, I said, "How long have you known?" His jaw tightened. His hands shifted on the steering wheel. "Jackson, 8 months, he said. I turned to look at him so fast the seatbelt locked against my chest. 8 months. Garrett, you've known for 8 months, and you're only now. I needed to be sure. He said it quietly but firmly, the way he used to settle arguments when we were kids. Like volume was beneath him. What I found, what I stumbled into, I needed to verify every single piece of it before I came to you. Because if I came to you with half a story, you'd have gone in guns blazing and gotten Michael killed. That word landed like a brick through a window. Killed. I sat back in my seat. My mouth went dry. "Start from the beginning," I said. "And don't skip anything." Jackson was a defense budget auditor. For 11 years, while I was losing everything in Millhaven, my brother was quietly moving through the corridors of government contracting, following money trails for a living. He was good at it, annoyingly good, the kind of good that meant powerful people both needed him and resented him at the same time. 8 months ago, he'd been assigned to audit a contractor called Arcturus Group, private firm, defense adjacent. On paper, they managed wilderness training facilities for various federal agencies, survival programs, off-grid logistics, that kind of thing. He paused here and glanced at me. "You've never heard of them," he said. It wasn't a question. Should I have? Nobody has. That's by design. He'd started pulling their financials, he explained, and something hadn't added up. Arcturus had 3 registered facilities, all in mountainous regions, all remote, all listed under vague federal program codes that didn't link back to any publicly acknowledged agency. One of those facilities was 11 miles northeast of Cedar Peak Ski Resort. I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. "Keep going," I said. Jackson had started digging, carefully. The way you dig when you suspect the ground beneath you might be wired. What he found, buried under layers of shell companies and classified procurement codes, was a program called North Star. On paper, North Star was a wilderness endurance and cognitive resilience program, training exceptional young operatives for long-term field work in extreme environments. The kind of program that took people who were physically capable, mentally sharp, and this is the part that made my stomach turn, untethered. No strong family connections, no one who'd come looking. But somewhere along the line, someone inside North Star had gotten ambitious, or lazy, or both, because they'd stopped waiting for willing recruits and started selecting them. Young people, teenagers mostly, exceptional ones, athletes, high academic performers, kids with documented survival instincts. They'd identify candidates through public records, school performance data, sports registries, and then they'd wait for an opportunity. "A ski trip," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Jackson nodded slowly. Michael's school had filed the Cedar Peak trip with the County Recreation Board 6 weeks before it happened, he said. His academic record was in the state gifted registry. His cross-country times were publicly listed on the school athletics page. He paused. "Garrett, they didn't grab Michael randomly. They chose him. Months before that trip, I pressed my hand flat against the dashboard. I needed something solid. 'He's alive,' I said. It wasn't a question either. I needed to say it like a fact, like gravity, like something I could stand on." Jackson looked at me. "He's alive," he confirmed. "I've seen a photograph. I will tell you honestly, I have cried exactly 3 times as an adult. When my mother died, when Annie died, and once, alone in my truck outside a gas station in my 2nd year of searching, when I'd finally allowed myself to consider, for 30 terrible minutes, that Michael might not be coming home. I did not cry in Jackson's car, but it was the closest I'd come to that gas station moment in a long time. I turned toward the window so my brother couldn't see my face, and I stayed that way for about a mile. Then I asked, "Where is he?" "A facility in northern Montana," Jackson said, "near the Canadian border. Remote. The property is registered as a private forestry research station. It's not on any map civilians can access. How many people are in there with him?" "Best I can count, 14 recruits currently active, plus staff. Victor Hale runs the operation on the ground. Former Special Operations. Not a man who makes mistakes easily. Victor Hale." I filed the name somewhere dark and permanent. "And the photograph," I said. "How did you get it?" Jackson was quiet for a beat. "I have a contact inside the program," he said carefully. "Someone who's been there from the beginning and isn't comfortable with the direction things have taken." "Who?" Another beat. "Her name is Elaine Marsh. She's a behavioral psychologist. She was brought in to assess the recruit's mental adaptation, make sure the transition was sustainable." He said the last word like it tasted wrong. "She contacted me through a back channel 3 months ago. She's been feeding me information since." "Why?" I asked. "Why would she risk that?" Jackson's hands tightened on the wheel again. "Because Michael isn't adapting," he said quietly. "He never fully adapted. 4 years in, and he still asks about you, still talks about home. They've tried everything to redirect that. New identity, intensive conditioning, isolation protocols." He paused. "He's been resistant since day one, and Victor Hale has run out of patience for resistant." The cold thing moved through me again, faster this time. "What does that mean?" I said. "What happens when Hale runs out of patience?" Jackson didn't answer right away. "Jackson, what happens?" "They don't keep people who won't commit," he said. "That's the policy. Has been from the beginning. They consider a non-committed recruit a liability." He glanced at me once, quick, and then back at the road. "Elaine says they've given Michael 60 days. After that, they reclassify him." "Reclassify," I repeated. "That's a very clean word for something that sounds very dirty." "Yes," Jackson said simply. "It is." We drove another 20 minutes before I spoke again. I was doing the math in my head. 60 days. 60 days from when? How many were already gone? How long ago did Elaine tell you this? I asked. 19 days ago. 41 days. We had 41 days. I exhaled slowly through my nose. Where are we going right now? I said. Right now, today. Where does this road end? A motel in Durango, Jackson said. Elaine is meeting us there tonight. She got out of the facility 4 days ago. Told Hale she needed a personal leave. He gave her a week. After that, he'll get suspicious. So she's the plan, I said. She's the beginning of the plan, Jackson corrected. She knows the layout, the staffing rotations, the security protocols. She knows where Michael is housed, what his daily schedule looks like, where the blind spots are. I nodded slowly. My brain was already shifting gears, from grief to something sharper, something it hadn't been in 4 years. Purpose. One more question, I said. Go ahead. I turned and looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd pulled into my driveway. Why did you come to me? I said. You could have gone to authorities, a journalist, a congressman, someone with actual power. Why drive to a broken-down cabin in Millhaven and collect the wreck of a man your brother has become? The road hummed beneath us. Then he said, because he's not my son, Garrett. And this isn't my fight to win. He paused, but he's my nephew, and I've spent 11 years being the kind of man who stays out of things that are hard. His voice shifted slightly, something underneath it that sounded like it had been waiting a long time to come out. I'm done being that man. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. But somewhere between Millhaven and Durango, in a black Mercedes on a snow-packed Colorado road, 11 years of silence quietly folded itself up and moved to the back seat. We had 41 days. We had a psychologist on the inside. We had a brother who'd finally shown up. And we had Michael, my son, still fighting after 4 years. Still asking about home. He was waiting for me. And I was coming. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. There's a moment in every man's life where he stops reacting and starts deciding, where the grief stops driving and he takes the wheel back. For me, that moment happened in a motel room in Durango, Colorado, at 11:17 at night, sitting across a scratched laminate table from a woman I'd never met, who had seen my son more recently than I had, watching her spread hand-drawn facility maps across the bedspread, like we were planning a military operation, which, if we're being honest, is exactly what we were doing. Elaine Marsh was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected exactly. Someone nervous, maybe. Guilty-looking. The kind of person who wrings their hands and speaks in whispers, and needs constant reassurance. Elaine Marsh did none of those things. She was composed, precise, and spoke the way surgeons probably speak before they cut. Clean sentences. No wasted words. Eyes that had clearly seen things she'd decided to stop pretending were acceptable. She shook my hand when Jackson introduced us, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "Your son has your jawline. I thought you should know that immediately." I had to look at the ceiling for a second. "Thank you," I managed. She nodded once and got straight to business. Here is what Elaine laid out across that motel bedspread. The Arcturus North Star facility sat on 400 acres of heavily forested Montana wilderness. One main access road, monitored gated with a guard rotation every 6 hours. The facility itself consisted of 7 structures: administrative building, 2 barracks, a training complex, medical unit, equipment storage, and what Elaine called, with a tone that made my jaw tighten, the adjustment wing. That last one was where they put recruits who were struggling to commit. Michael had been in the adjustment wing for 3 weeks. Victor Hale, I'd been collecting mental images of this man since Jackson first said his name, ran a staff of 22. 12 were operational security. The rest were trainers, medical personnel, and administrative. Everyone was vetted. Everyone had signed enough NDAs to paper a courthouse. "How do we get in?" Jackson said. Elaine looked at him calmly. "We don't," she said. "Not through the front." She pointed to a section of the map, the facility's eastern perimeter. "Here, the boundary fence has a maintenance corridor that runs along the tree line. It's checked once every 48 hours. The next check was this morning." She looked up. "We have 47 hours before anyone walks that corridor again." I leaned forward, and Michael, adjustment wing, east side of the building, ground floor. She tapped the map. "There's a ventilation access panel on the exterior wall. It's not alarmed. They never thought anyone would be coming in through it. They only ever worried about people getting out. Their first mistake, I said. One of several, Elaine said quietly, and something in her voice told me she'd been cataloging those mistakes for a long time. We left Durango at 3 in the morning. Jackson drove. Elaine navigated. I sat in the back seat with Michael's photograph in my hand and a silence in my chest that was completely different from the one that had filled the car earlier. This one wasn't heavy. This one was loaded. 14 hours to the Montana facility. We stopped once for fuel and bad coffee. Jackson tried to hand me a sandwich somewhere around Wyoming, and I looked at it like it had personally offended me. You need to eat, he said. I need my son. You can do both. I ate the sandwich. It was terrible. I didn't say that because he was right, and I was trying to be mature about it. We arrived at the tree line east of the facility at dusk the following day, left the Mercedes hidden on a forestry access road half a mile back, and covered the rest on foot through knee-deep snow. I want to tell you I was scared. I think honesty demands it. My heart was doing things hearts are not designed to do continuously. My hands were cold inside my gloves. Every snapped branch underfoot sounded to my ears like a gunshot. But here is the thing about 4 years of loving someone you can't find. It builds a particular kind of stubbornness in a man. A refusal to be stopped by normal things like fear and reasonable odds. I had crossed the line from cautious to committed, somewhere around year 2, and there was no crossing back. Elaine found the maintenance corridor exactly where she said it would be. The fence was chain link, partially obscured by overgrown brush. Clearly not a priority for a facility that relied on its secrecy more than its perimeter. We were through in under 3 minutes. The adjustment wing was a gray, featureless building that looked like someone had designed it specifically to communicate that hope was not available here. I hated it immediately and completely. Elaine led us to the exterior wall. The ventilation panel was exactly where she'd marked it. A 2-foot square access cover, 4 screws, removable with the multi-tool Jackson had thought to bring, and I had not thought to thank him for yet. Jackson worked the screws. I crouched beside him. When we're inside, Elaine whispered, the corridor runs left. Michael is the 3rd door. It won't be locked from the outside. They rely on psychological compliance more than physical restraint at this stage. Psychological compliance. I added that to the list of things Victor Hale was going to answer for. And Hale? I said. Administrative building, she said. Night shift. He won't be in the wing. Then let's move before that changes, Jackson said, pulling the panel free. The corridor inside was dim and narrow, and smelled like industrial cleaning fluid, and something stale underneath it that made my chest ache in a way I couldn't name. 1st door, 2nd door, 3rd door. I put my hand flat against it. Took 1 breath, then I pushed it open. The room was small. A cot, a desk, a single barred window letting in a parallelogram of moonlight, and sitting on the edge of that cot, still awake at what must have been close to midnight, with his elbows on his knees and his head down, was my son. 21 years old now, broader in the shoulders than I remembered, hair shorter, a scar along his left jawline that hadn't been there before. But the way he looked up when the door opened, that reflex, that instant alertness, I recognized that. I'd seen it 10,000 times. I'd watched it develop from the time he was 3 years old and heard a strange sound in the house and came looking instead of hiding. He was always brave. Always. Even before they got their hands on him. He stared at me. I stared at him. 4 years of searching, of not sleeping, of cold coffee and dead-end leads and borrowed money and Spencer Locke's unrequested casseroles. 4 years, collapsed into about 4 seconds of pure, wordless, disorienting reality. Then Michael said, in a voice that was deeper than I remembered and shakier than he probably wanted it to be, "Dad?" And I said, because I am apparently incapable of a normal human response under pressure, I said, "You still have that terrible taste in helmets, I hope." He broke first. I broke half a second later. And somewhere in that gray, horrible little room, we met in the middle, and I held my son for the first time in 4 years. And I want you to understand, I am not a small man. And Michael had grown into someone nearly my size, and we probably looked absolutely ridiculous. I did not care even slightly. We had 7 minutes before the next internal check. Michael moved fast, no hesitation, like some part of him had been packed and ready for exactly this moment. He grabbed nothing from that room. There was nothing in it worth taking. We went back through the ventilation corridor, through the fence, through the tree line. We were nearly to the Mercedes when the facility's exterior lights snapped on behind us. "Run," Elaine said, completely calmly, like she suggested running every day. We ran. Here is where I tell you about the revenge. Because you came for it, and I promised it, and I am a man of my word. We didn't burn the facility down. We didn't extract Michael at gunpoint or leave a trail of unconscious guards through the snow. We're not those people. What we did was considerably more permanent. Elaine Marsh had not spent 3 months feeding Jackson information just to help one father rescue one son. She had spent 3 months building a case. Every document, every photograph, every internal communication she could access. Copied, encrypted, stored on a drive she'd kept sewn into the lining of her coat for 11 weeks. That drive went to 3 places simultaneously. The morning after we pulled Michael out, a federal investigator Jackson had quietly cultivated for 2 years, a journalist at a national outlet who specialized in government contractor misconduct, and a senator on the Armed Services Committee who had, as it turned out, been asking uncomfortable questions about Arcturus Group's procurement codes for months, and had been getting stonewalled at every turn. They couldn't stonewall all 3 at once. Within 72 hours, North Star was the subject of a federal investigation. Within 3 weeks, the facility was raided. Victor Hale was arrested on a Monday morning. I know because Elaine sent me a 2-word message when it happened. It's done. The 13 other young people in that facility were recovered and returned to their families. I won't describe those reunions because they belong to those families, not to this story. But I will tell you that I followed the news of every single one of them, and I kept a list of their names, and I still have that list. Arcturus Group was dissolved by court order 4 months later. Every executive who'd signed off on North Star, every person who had sat in a boardroom and approved the taking of children and called it a program, faced federal charges. It was not quick justice. It was not dramatic justice. It was the slow, grinding, paper-heavy kind that doesn't make for exciting television, but has the enormous advantage of being permanent. That was enough for me. Spencer Locke cried when we pulled into Millhaven. Actually cried, which I never expected, and which he immediately denied. Something in my eye, he said, wiping his face aggressively. Both eyes? Michael said. Spencer pointed at him. I don't know you well enough for you to be smart with me yet. Michael grinned, and I want to tell you about that grin, because it was the same grin. 4 years, a different name, an adjustment wing, Victor Hale's entire operation, and it was still the same grin, the one that used to get him out of trouble with Annie, the one she'd given him honestly, her exact grin, wearing his face. Some things, it turns out, they cannot take. Jackson stayed for 2 weeks. On the last night, we sat on my porch, the same porch Spencer had kept vigil on for 4 years, and split a bottle of something neither of us would normally drink, and sat in a silence that had finally lost all its furniture. At some point he said, I should have come sooner, to Millhaven. After Annie, I should have come. And he said, I'm sorry, Garrett. And I looked at my brother, who had audited his way into a conspiracy, driven a Mercedes up a gravel road, unscrewed a ventilation panel in the Montana wilderness, and handed me back my son. And I said, You came when it counted most. That's not nothing, Jackson. He nodded, looked out at the dark tree line. No, he said quietly. I suppose it's not. Side by side in the driveway, him actually knowing what he was looking at under the hood now. Apparently wilderness survival training has some transferable skills, and me handing him tools and pretending I understood his explanations. At one point he looked over at me and said, You really spent everything, didn't you? Trying to find me. Every last cent, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I knew you would. The whole time I was in there. Whenever it got bad. That's what I held on to. I just kept thinking, he's not done looking. He would never stop looking. I looked at my son standing in the driveway in the Colorado spring sun. And I thought about 4 years of cold coffee and dead ends and borrowed money and Spencer's unrequested casseroles. I thought about a yellow ski helmet and a boot print in the snow that stopped like God had reached down and lifted my boy off the earth. And I said, I want you to know something, Michael. I want you to hear it and keep it. He looked at me. There is no version of this world, I said, in which I stop. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then that grin, Annie's grin, his grin, the one they couldn't take, spread across his face. And he handed me a wrench and said, Now hold that while I show you what's actually wrong with this truck. Some losses don't break you all at once. But some things, when they come back, when they finally, stubbornly, impossibly come back, they put you back together the same way, quietly, patiently, piece by piece, until one morning you reach for something solid, and it's there. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.